The grand ballroom was alive with the soft murmur of conversation and the clinking of champagne glasses. Gabriel Moro, a man who had built his wealth with calculated precision, stood at the edge of the gathering, his mind far removed from the charity event swirling around him. His expression remained stoic, as always, a mask he had perfected over the years. These events bored him, but his publicist insisted it was important for his image. After all, he was one of the wealthiest men in the city. He swirled his drink absent-mindedly, glancing around the room. Everything felt scripted, the same faces, the same hollow smiles, the same business deals disguised as friendly chatter. It was all too familiar. And then, he saw him. Across the room, a man Gabriel had never seen before was laughing with a small group of people, completely unaware of Gabriel's gaze. At first, it was just a passing glance, but then something caught Gabriel's eye, a glint of gold on the man's finger. A ring. No, not just any ring. A ring Gabriel knew all too well. His breath caught in his throat. That was impossible. His heart began to race, and the blood drained from his face as his mind screamed with disbelief. That ring, it was the Moro family heirloom. A one-of-a-kind gold signet ring passed down through generations of their bloodline, inscribed with their family's crest. A raven clasping an olive branch, symbolizing peace through control. Gabriel had seen it 1,000 times in his youth, worn by his brother, Edward. Edward. The name alone sent a surge of memories flooding back, all of them bitter. Gabriel had not seen or heard from his brother in 30 years. Edward had disappeared after a vicious argument that had torn the family apart. The night Edward vanished, he had taken the ring with him, severing any remaining ties with the family. Gabriel had long assumed his brother was dead, a casualty of a reckless life. That ring, the one Edward always wore, had vanished along with him. But now, here it was, gleaming under the soft lights of the ballroom, sitting on the finger of a complete stranger. Gabriel's stomach twisted. How could this man have the ring? What did it mean? Was this a cruel trick? Or had Edward resurfaced, hiding in plain sight all these years? The thoughts raced through Gabriel's mind faster than he could control them. He set his glass down on a nearby table, barely aware of the polite chatter continuing around him. His focus was solely on the man with the ring. Gabriel's normally steady hands shook as he began moving through the crowd, his eyes never leaving the stranger. As he neared, Gabriel could hear the man's laughter, casual and relaxed, completely oblivious to the storm he was stirring within Gabriel. Closer now, Gabriel studied him. He was in his mid-30s, tall with sharp features. There was no resemblance to Edward, but the ring, there was no mistaking it. It was the Moro heirloom. Gabriel's mind screamed for answers, but just as he closed the distance, the man's eyes met his. There was a brief moment of recognition, not the kind shared between two strangers, but something else, as if the man knew exactly who Gabriel was and what he had come for. Without warning, the stranger turned abruptly, disappearing into the crowd as though he had expected this moment. Gabriel's heart pounded. He quickened his pace, following him, pushing through the throngs of guests with uncharacteristic urgency. But the ballroom was a maze of faces and distractions, and Gabriel lost sight of him within seconds. He cursed under his breath, scanning the room desperately. Where had he gone? The sharp edge of panic gnawed at Gabriel's composure. He hadn't imagined it. That was the ring. But who was this man? And why did he have something that had vanished with Edward 3 decades ago? As Gabriel stood frozen in the middle of the crowded room, his mind was overwhelmed with questions. He had thought his past was buried, but tonight, it had come rushing back with a force he wasn't prepared for. Who was that man? Gabriel's thoughts whirled as he realized, with dawning certainty, that his brother's story was far from over. Gabriel is left staring into the crowd, heart racing, knowing that this encounter will unravel everything he thought he knew about his family and Edward's disappearance. Gabriel Moro sat in his office the next morning, staring blankly at the city skyline. The sun had risen hours ago, casting golden light across the towering buildings, but Gabriel hadn't moved. His mind was still in that ballroom, replaying the brief encounter over and over again. The ring, the stranger, the sense of familiarity. It gnawed at him, refusing to let go. Edward. The name echoed in his thoughts like a ghost from his past. For 30 years, Gabriel had convinced himself that his brother was gone forever, buried beneath the weight of their bitter fallout. The last time they had spoken, anger had poisoned their words, and the rift between them had grown beyond repair. That night, Edward had walked away, vanishing without a trace, leaving behind only rumors and speculation. The Morrow family's wealth and influence could find anyone, yet Edward had slipped through their grasp like smoke. The ring was a reminder of everything Gabriel had tried to bury. He leaned back in his leather chair, rubbing his temples. The room around him was quiet, almost oppressively so, filled with dark, heavy furniture that mirrored the gravity of his thoughts. His father's portrait loomed over him, the stern eyes judging him from beyond the grave. Gabriel had inherited everything: the business, the estate, the responsibility. And Edward? He had inherited nothing but his own reckless desires, or so Gabriel had always believed. Until now. Who was that man last night? Why did he have the Morrow family heirloom? Gabriel stood abruptly, the tension in his chest tightening. He couldn't let this go. He needed answers, and he needed them now. His first thought was to hire someone, a professional who could find the man and uncover his connection to Edward. That was how Gabriel solved problems, with money and resources. But something about this felt different. It was personal, too personal. He reached for his phone and dialed the number of his most trusted private investigator, a man named Randall Keene. Keene had worked for Gabriel for over a decade, handling delicate situations and discreetly uncovering hidden truths. If anyone could track down the man with the ring, it was him. Keene, a gravelly voice answered after a few rings. Randall, I need you to find someone for me, Gabriel said. His voice steady despite the urgency burning inside him. He explained the events of the previous night, describing the man in detail and, most importantly, the ring. There was a pause on the other end. A family heirloom? And you're sure it's the same one? I'm certain, Gabriel replied, his fingers tightening around the phone. I need to know who he is and where he got it. I'll get on it, Keene said. Give me a day or two. I'll find him. Gabriel ended the call, but the tension didn't ease. As he sat back down at his desk, his mind drifted to the past, to that final argument with Edward. It had been a stormy night, the rain pounding against the windows of their father's estate. Gabriel could still hear the sharp echo of Edward's voice, filled with anger and frustration. You don't understand, Edward had shouted, pacing the room. All you care about is this damn business. The family name, the empire, all of it. But what about me? What about what I want? Gabriel had stood by the fireplace, his arms crossed, his face a mask of cold indifference. He had been raised to prioritize the family legacy, to protect it at all costs. Edward's defiance had always struck him as selfish, foolish. You have responsibilities, Edward, Gabriel had replied, his voice clipped. You can't just walk away from everything our father built. This isn't about you. Edward had stopped pacing, his eyes flashing with fury. I'm not you, Gabriel. I never was, and I never will be. I won't spend my life trapped in this prison you've built for yourself. Gabriel had felt his control slipping, his own anger rising to match Edward's. You're running away from your duty. That's all you ever do, run. Edward's face had hardened, and for a moment, Gabriel had seen the pain behind the anger, the years of resentment bubbling to the surface. This isn't about duty. This is about you trying to control everything and everyone around you. You can have the business, Gabriel. You can have the fortune, the power. But I'm done with this family. And just like that, Edward had walked out, the door slamming behind him. Gabriel had never seen him again. Over the years, he had tried to push the memory aside, convincing himself that Edward's departure was for the best. But now, the reappearance of the ring shattered that illusion. The next day, Gabriel received a call from Keene. I've found him, the investigator said, his voice businesslike. The man's name is Marcus Shaw. Gabriel frowned. The name didn't ring any bells. Who is he? Marcus Shaw is a mid-level executive, works for a shipping company. No major connections to anyone in your circles. But here's the strange part. There's no record of him before about 15 years ago. It's like he just appeared out of nowhere. Gabriel's pulse quickened. What about the ring? Any link to my brother? Keen hesitated. Not directly. But Shaw seems to know more than he's letting on. He was seen at the event last night talking to a few people who knew Edward back in the day. Gabriel felt a chill run down his spine. Where can I find him? I'll send you the address. He frequents a bar downtown, the Iron Door. I'd advise caution, Gabriel. Something about this doesn't feel right. Gabriel hung up, his mind spinning. Marcus Shaw, the man with the ring. He grabbed his coat and headed for the door, his determination growing with every step. He had to confront Marcus, face to face. He needed to know the truth, about the ring, about Edward, and about why his past was suddenly coming back to haunt him. Gabriel arrives at the bar, spotting Marcus sitting alone. The moment of truth is near, but Gabriel can't shake the feeling that this encounter will lead to answers he's not prepared for. The Iron Door was nothing like the high-end establishments Gabriel Morrow usually frequented. It was a dimly lit bar tucked away in one of the quieter streets downtown, a place where the weight of life hung heavy in the air. The worn wooden floors creaked beneath his shoes as he stepped inside, the faint smell of old leather and whiskey permeating the room. A few patrons sat scattered around, lost in their own conversations or silently nursing drinks. Gabriel scanned the room quickly, his heart pounding. And then he saw him, Marcus Shaw. He was sitting alone at a table near the back, a drink in hand, his eyes fixed on something in the distance. He looked calm, at ease, completely unaware that Gabriel had found him. But Gabriel's pulse quickened with every step as he moved toward the man, knowing this moment could change everything. As Gabriel approached, he noticed the ring gleaming on Marcus's hand again. There was no mistaking it. The signet ring, engraved with the Morrow family crest, was unmistakable, its intricate design catching the low light of the bar. Mind if I join you? Gabriel's voice cut through the quiet, startling Marcus. Marcus looked up, his eyes narrowing slightly as he recognized Gabriel. But instead of surprise or fear, a subtle smirk played across his lips. Of course, he said, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. I've been expecting you. Gabriel sat down, his heart pounding in his chest. You know who I am? Marcus leaned back in his chair, taking a slow sip from his glass. Gabriel Morrow, one of the richest men in the city. Hard to miss. Gabriel's eyes flicked to the ring again, his voice growing tense. Then you know what I'm here for. Marcus followed his gaze, then slowly lifted his hand, turning it so the ring caught the light. This? It seems to have caught your attention. Gabriel's jaw clenched. That ring belongs to my family. It was passed down through generations. The last person to wear it was my brother, Edward. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Edward Morrow, your long-lost brother, right? He tilted his head, studying Gabriel for a moment before continuing. What makes you think this ring still belongs to you? Gabriel's patience was wearing thin. His voice dropped, cold and demanding. Where did you get it? And how do you know about my brother? Marcus didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned forward, his voice lowering. I'm not here to play games with you, Gabriel. I'm sure you've figured out by now that this ring isn't just a piece of jewelry. It's a symbol, a connection to a part of your past you've tried to forget. Gabriel's heart pounded harder, but he kept his composure. I haven't forgotten anything, but you've got something that doesn't belong to you. So, I'll ask you one more time. Where did you get the ring? Marcus's expression shifted slightly, a shadow passing over his face. I didn't steal it, if that's what you're implying. It was given to me. Gabriel's breath caught. By who? Marcus held his gaze for a moment before answering. By Edward. Gabriel froze. The air around him seemed to thicken, his mind racing with disbelief. Edward is alive? A flicker of something passed through Marcus's eyes. Was it regret? Sadness? But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. He was, but not anymore. The weight of Marcus's words hit Gabriel like a punch to the gut. He struggled to keep his voice steady. What do you mean, was? What happened to him? Marcus looked away, his fingers tracing the edge of his glass as if lost in thought. Edward Morrow didn't die when he disappeared 30 years ago. He lived a life you never knew about, far away from the empire you inherited. But it wasn't an easy life, Gabriel. He was hunted, betrayed, forced into hiding by people who wanted to bury the truth. Gabriel's blood ran cold. The truth? What truth? Marcus's eyes locked with Gabriel's, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. Your brother was trying to protect something, or rather someone. Gabriel frowned, confusion swirling with his anger. Someone? Who? Marcus sat back, exhaling deeply, as if deciding how much he wanted to reveal. Me. Gabriel blinked, his mind reeling. You? What are you talking about? A silence fell between them, thick and heavy, as Marcus leaned forward again. Edward Morrow was my father. Gabriel's world spun. He opened his mouth, but no words came. It didn't make sense. Edward never mentioned a child, never hinted at the possibility that he had started a family after leaving. And yet, here Marcus sat, wearing the ring that had once symbolized the Morrow legacy. The man sitting across from Gabriel was his nephew. How? Gabriel finally managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. How is that possible? Marcus's expression softened, and for the first time, Gabriel saw the pain in his eyes. Edward met my mother years after he left your family. They tried to live a quiet life, far from everything, but his past caught up with him. He knew he couldn't run forever, so he gave me the ring, told me to wear it if I ever came looking for you. Gabriel's mind raced, fragments of the past colliding with the present. His brother had a son he had never known about. He could barely grasp the enormity of the revelation. I don't understand, Gabriel said, shaking his head. Why didn't he ever reach out? Why didn't he tell me? Marcus's face darkened. Because he didn't trust you. He didn't trust anyone in your family. Gabriel stiffened. What do you mean? Marcus's gaze hardened. Edward was running from more than just his past, Gabriel. He was running from someone in your family. Someone who wanted him gone. Gabriel's heart pounded in his chest, the implications of Marcus's words sinking in. His father, the stern, ruthless patriarch of the Morrow family, the man who had controlled everything, including Edward's fate. Could their father have been responsible for Edward's disappearance? Could he have forced his own son to vanish? 1,000 questions flooded Gabriel's mind, but before he could speak, Marcus leaned in closer, his voice low and filled with warning. I've told you enough for now, but if you keep digging into Edward's past, be prepared. The truth is darker than you think, and it could destroy everything. Gabriel is left sitting in stunned silence as Marcus stands to leave, the weight of his nephew's revelation pressing down on him. His brother's disappearance was no accident, and the dark truth of what happened could shatter the Morrow family forever. Gabriel Morrow stood frozen as Marcus left the bar, the heavy door swinging shut behind him with a dull thud. The low hum of the bar returned, but to Gabriel, it felt distant, like white noise buzzing in the background. His mind was racing, trying to grasp the enormity of what had just unfolded. Edward was my brother. Marcus, my nephew. For 30 years, Gabriel had believed his brother had vanished by choice, abandoning the Morrow family and everything that came with it. He had written Edward off as reckless, a man too wild to carry the family name with the same cold dignity Gabriel had inherited. But Marcus's revelation had shattered that belief. His brother hadn't just run away. He had been running for his life, from someone within their own family. Gabriel left the bar in a daze, the brisk evening air biting at his skin. The lights of the city blurred around him as he walked, barely aware of his surroundings. His thoughts circled back to one person, his father. Could their father really have been behind Edward's disappearance? The more Gabriel thought about it, the more plausible it seemed. Their father, Charles Morrow, had been a ruthless man, controlling everything and everyone around him. He had built the Morrow Empire with an iron fist, and anyone who opposed him was quickly removed from the picture. Gabriel had always respected his father's strength, his unwavering focus on the family legacy. But now he couldn't help but wonder if that strength had crossed a line into something far darker. Gabriel's footsteps echoed in the quiet streets as he made his way back to his penthouse. Once inside, the silence of his home pressed in on him, amplifying his racing thoughts. He moved through the darkened rooms like a ghost, heading straight for his study, where the answers might lie buried beneath decades of dust. The study was filled with the remnants of the Morrow family's history. Shelves lined the walls, crammed with old business records, personal journals, and family mementos. Gabriel hadn't touched most of these items in years, but tonight, he knew he needed to dig through them. Somewhere in the past, the truth about Edward's disappearance was hidden. Gabriel began with the obvious: his father's journals. Charles had been meticulous about recording everything, from business dealings to personal matters. Gabriel hadn't looked at them in years, but now, as he flipped through the pages, he searched for any mention of Edward in the months leading up to his disappearance. The early entries were typical: business deals, meetings with powerful associates, and comments about Gabriel's progress in handling the family business. But then, a few pages in, Gabriel found what he was looking for: a series of entries about Edward. June 15, 1993. Edward is becoming a problem. His defiance is growing, and he refuses to see reason. This family cannot afford his reckless behavior. If he continues like this, he will destroy everything I have built. Gabriel's hands tightened around the journal. His father had clearly been frustrated with Edward, but that wasn't a surprise. What Gabriel found next, however, made his blood run cold. July 2, 1993. Edward knows too much. I've tried to steer him back toward the family, but he's threatening to expose secrets that could ruin us. He's become dangerous. I'll have to take steps to ensure he doesn't destroy us. Gabriel felt a sharp pang of dread. What secrets had Edward threatened to expose? His father's tone was unmistakable. Edward wasn't just a rebellious son. He had become a liability, a threat to the Morrow legacy. Gabriel flipped through more pages, scanning for anything that might explain what had happened next. The entries following that ominous note were vague, but the tension was clear. Edward's name stopped appearing altogether after that summer. The realization hit Gabriel hard. His father had erased Edward. Whatever had happened, it was clear that Charles had taken matters into his own hands, removing his own son from the family equation. But the specifics were missing. There were no more written records, no more clues about how or why Edward had been forced into hiding. Gabriel set the journal down, his chest tight. There was only one place left to look: Edward's letters. For years, Gabriel had avoided the letters Edward had sent him before disappearing. They had been left unopened, tucked away in the bottom of a drawer, reminders of a painful past he had never wanted to confront. But now, they might hold the answers he needed. With trembling hands, Gabriel retrieved the letters and tore open the first one. The paper was yellowed with age, and Edward's handwriting was familiar but shaky. "Gabriel, I know you probably won't read this, but I have to try. Things have gotten worse with Father. He's hiding things that could ruin us all if they came to light. I tried to confront him, but you know how he is. He'll never admit what he's done. I don't know who to trust anymore. You've always been the loyal son, and maybe I've been too wild for my own good, but I need you to listen. There's something happening that's bigger than both of us. If I disappear, know that it wasn't by choice." Gabriel's heart pounded as he read. Edward had tried to warn him, and Gabriel had ignored it, blinded by his own sense of duty to their father. He rifled through the remaining letters, each one more desperate than the last. Edward had discovered something: a financial scandal, illegal dealings, something their father had done to maintain the empire. But Edward's letters didn't detail the specifics. He had been too careful, knowing that any letter could fall into the wrong hands. Gabriel's mind raced as he pieced together the fragments of the past. His father had been involved in something dangerous, and Edward had been caught in the crossfire. The question was, what was the secret so dangerous that it had led to Edward's disappearance? The only person who might know was Marcus. The following day, Gabriel arranged another meeting with Marcus, this time in a private office far from the public eye. When Marcus arrived, he looked more guarded, as if he knew Gabriel had uncovered something. "Why didn't you tell me everything last night?" Gabriel asked, his voice strained. "You left out too much." Marcus met his gaze, his expression unreadable. "I told you what you needed to know. My father wanted to protect you, but he also knew that if you dug too deep, it could destroy you." Gabriel leaned forward, his frustration bubbling over. "Protect me from what? What did Edward discover?" Marcus sighed, his shoulders tense. Your father was involved in illegal dealings with a rival family, the Shaws. They had control over certain industries that your father wanted. But the deal went bad, and your father framed Edward to cover his tracks. Edward knew the truth and tried to expose it, but before he could, he had to run. Gabriel's head swam with the implications. My father framed his own son? Marcus nodded. It was the only way to keep the Morrow name clean. If the truth had come out, the empire would have crumbled. Gabriel stared at the table, his mind racing. His father had destroyed his own family to protect his legacy, and now the truth was coming back to haunt him. Gabriel's phone buzzed with an incoming call. He answered, and the voice on the other end was icy and familiar. An old associate of his father. You're digging into dangerous territory, Gabriel. Stop now, or you'll end up just like your brother. Gabriel Morrow's hand trembled as he gripped the phone. The cold voice on the other end was unmistakable. Franklin Shaw, a name that carried weight in the underbelly of high society. Shaw was one of his father's oldest associates, a man with a reputation for ruthlessness. But Gabriel hadn't spoken to him in years, not since the days when his father had ruled the Morrow Empire with an iron fist. Now, the threat was clear. You know what happened to Edward, Gabriel said, his voice hoarse with anger and fear. Don't you? There was a pause on the other end of the line, then a low chuckle. Gabriel, you're smarter than this. I warned your father once. Some things are better left buried. Edward didn't listen, and neither are you. Gabriel's chest tightened. Are you admitting that you had something to do with his disappearance? Disappearance? Shaw's voice dripped with mockery. Edward's fate was sealed the moment he tried to expose your father. He made his choice, and I made sure the consequences were delivered. Gabriel's grip on the phone tightened until his knuckles turned white. What the hell did you do to him? You're digging too deep, Gabriel, Shaw replied, his voice calm, as if discussing nothing more than a business deal. If you keep this up, you'll end up just like him. My advice? Walk away. Enjoy your wealth, your power. Let the past die, because if you keep chasing ghosts, you'll find yourself buried alongside them. The line went dead. Gabriel stood frozen, the silence of the room pressing in around him. His breath came in shallow gasps as the full weight of Shaw's words sank in. His father had been involved in something dark, something illegal, and Edward had known too much. When Edward had tried to reveal the truth, it had cost him his life. Shaw had confirmed what Gabriel had been dreading. Edward hadn't just run away. He had been silenced. For years, Gabriel had told himself that Edward's disappearance was the result of his brother's own reckless choices. But now he knew the truth. His father and Shaw had orchestrated everything, all to protect the Morrow Empire. And Edward had paid the price for trying to stop it. Gabriel sank into his chair, his mind reeling. His father's betrayal was far worse than he could have imagined. And now, Shaw had made it clear that Gabriel was walking the same dangerous path Edward had. But I can't stop now, Gabriel thought. I need to know everything. He couldn't let Edward's death be in vain. He had to expose the truth, no matter the cost. The next day, Gabriel met Marcus again, this time in a private office where they wouldn't be disturbed. The mood between them was tense, the weight of Gabriel's new discovery hanging in the air. I spoke to Shaw, Gabriel said as soon as Marcus sat down. He threatened me. Marcus's expression darkened. You shouldn't have contacted him. You don't know how dangerous he is. I didn't have a choice, Gabriel snapped. He admitted it, Marcus. Shaw and my father framed Edward. They had him killed. Marcus lowered his gaze, his jaw clenched. I know. Gabriel's breath caught. You knew? You knew they were behind it all, and you didn't tell me? I couldn't, Marcus said quietly. There are things you don't understand. My father wanted to protect you, Gabriel. He knew that if you found out the truth, it would put you in danger. Gabriel's frustration boiled over. I don't care about the danger. Edward was my brother and your father. He was trying to protect both of us, and now he's dead because of it. Marcus looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and pain. I know, but you're not the only one who lost him. I grew up without a father because of your family's choices. I've spent my whole life wondering what happened to him, and now I finally know the truth. But exposing it won't bring him back. It will only get us killed. Gabriel paced the room, his thoughts spiraling. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Edward had sacrificed everything to protect them, and now Marcus was telling him to let it go, to walk away from the truth? I can't do that, Gabriel said, his voice firm. I won't let them get away with this. Marcus sighed, running a hand through his hair. If you keep digging, you're going to make powerful enemies, Gabriel. Enemies who won't hesitate to destroy everything you've built. Shaw isn't the only one you should be worried about. Gabriel frowned. What do you mean? There's more to this than you realize, Marcus said, his voice low. The Morrow family isn't just a powerful business empire. Your father was involved in a lot of shady dealings, and some of those dealings involved people far more dangerous than Shaw. If you expose them, you'll be opening Pandora's box. Gabriel's mind raced. He had always known his father was ruthless in business, but he had never suspected just how deep the corruption went. Now, it seemed that the Morrow Empire had been built on lies, manipulation, and blood. But Gabriel wasn't going to walk away, not after everything he had learned. So, what do we do? Gabriel asked, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. Marcus hesitated, then met Gabriel's gaze. There's only one way to stop Shaw and the others. We need to get proof. Hard evidence that connects them to Edward's death and your father's crimes. Without that, they'll deny everything, and no one will believe us. And where do we find that? Gabriel asked. Marcus stood up and crossed the room to a small leather briefcase. He opened it and pulled out a small, old notebook. The edges were worn, the pages yellowed with age. He handed it to Gabriel, his expression serious. This is my father's journal, Marcus said quietly. It has names, dates, and details about everything he discovered. Shaw, your father, and the deals they made. It's not enough to take them down, but it's a start. With this, we can find more. Gabriel stared at the journal, his heart pounding. It was a lifeline, a piece of the puzzle that could bring everything crashing down. But it also put a target on his back. You'll have to be careful, Marcus warned. Once they know you have this, they'll come after you. Gabriel nodded, his resolve hardening. Let them. I'm not running from this. That night, Gabriel sat alone in his penthouse, the journal open in front of him. His father's name appeared again and again in the entries, tied to secret meetings, bribery, and illegal dealings with the Shaw family and other powerful figures. As he read, Gabriel realized just how far his father had gone to protect the Morrow Empire, and just how many lives had been destroyed in the process. But one entry, in particular, made Gabriel's blood run cold. It was dated a few weeks before Edward had disappeared. August 18, 1993. Edward found out. He knows everything. He's going to expose us. I've tried to reason with him, but he's too stubborn. He won't listen. Shaw says we need to act quickly. If Edward talks, we're finished. Gabriel stared at the entry, his hands trembling. His father had known that Edward was going to reveal the truth, and instead of trying to stop the corruption, he had chosen to silence his own son. The truth was clear now. Edward hadn't just been a victim of circumstance. He had been murdered by his own family to protect their empire. As Gabriel stared at the damning journal entry, his phone buzzed with an incoming message. It was from an unknown number, and it read, "We know what you have. Stop now, or you'll end up like Edward. Last warning." Gabriel stared at his phone. The message's ominous words burned into his mind. "We know what you have. Stop now, or you'll end up like Edward. Last warning." His fingers trembled as he set the phone down on the desk beside Edward's journal. The quiet of his penthouse felt suffocating now, the weight of the warning pressing down on him like a vice. His heart pounded in his chest, not from fear, though the threat was real and looming, but from the sheer gravity of what he had uncovered. His father had orchestrated Edward's death, and now Gabriel had the journal that could expose it all. Gabriel knew there was no turning back. He had opened Pandora's box, and whatever came next, he had to be ready to face it. But how far does this go? He thought, his eyes scanning the faded pages of his brother's journal once more. Edward had written about powerful men, not just Shaw but others who had stakes in the Morrow Empire's dirty dealings. They would stop at nothing to keep their secrets buried, just as they had silenced Edward. Gabriel's phone buzzed again, jolting him from his thoughts. He glanced down, half expecting another threat. But this time it was Marcus. "Did you get a message?" Marcus's voice came through the line, tense and urgent. "Yes," Gabriel replied, his voice low. "They know we have the journal." There was a pause on the other end, the weight of the situation hanging heavy between them. "They're going to come for you now, Gabriel," Marcus said, his tone grave. "You need to be careful. Shaw and his people won't hesitate to take you down if you keep pushing this." "I'm not backing down," Gabriel replied firmly, his mind made up. "I don't care what they threaten. Edward deserves justice, and I'm going to make sure they pay for what they did to him." Marcus sighed. "I know how you feel, but you need to understand how dangerous this is. Shaw's network runs deep. He has connections in law enforcement, in the government. People like him don't get caught unless they want to." Gabriel stood, pacing the length of his office, his thoughts racing. "Then we have to hit them where it hurts. There must be something in the journal that connects Shaw to my father's deals, something we can use to expose them." "There's more," Marcus said quietly. "I've been going through the journal, and I found something you need to see. There's a meeting coming up, one that Shaw and the others are involved in. It's big, some kind of deal they're finalizing. If we can get proof of what they're doing, it could be enough to take them down." Gabriel's pulse quickened. "When and where?" "In 3 days, at a private estate outside the city," Marcus replied. "It's heavily guarded, and they'll have eyes on everyone who gets near it. But if we can get in, we might be able to expose them." Gabriel felt a surge of determination. This was their chance, their only chance to bring Shaw and the rest of his father's associates down once and for all. "We'll need a plan," he said, his mind already working through the details. "We can't go in blind." "I've got some ideas," Marcus said, "but we need to be smart about this. If they even suspect we're coming, it'll be over before we even start." Gabriel nodded, though Marcus couldn't see him. "I'm all in. Let's take them down." For the next 3 days, Gabriel and Marcus worked tirelessly to prepare. Marcus had used his contacts to gather as much information as he could about the upcoming meeting. It was being held at a secluded estate owned by one of Shaw's partners, an old money businessman with a clean public image but a dirty hand in underground dealings. The estate was remote, surrounded by thick forests and patrolled by private security. Getting in would be the easy part. The hard part would be getting out, alive. They couldn't trust the police, not with Shaw's influence. This had to be done quietly, without attracting attention until they had the proof they needed to expose Shaw's network. Gabriel had enlisted the help of a trusted former military operative, someone who could guide them through the security without raising alarms. The night before the meeting, Gabriel sat alone in his penthouse, the city lights flickering below him like stars. He thought of Edward, the brother he had spent decades resenting, only to realize too late that he had been the victim all along. Gabriel's chest tightened with a mixture of guilt and resolve. He had failed Edward once, but this time, he wouldn't let him down. As Gabriel went through the plan in his head one last time, a sharp knock on his door startled him. He wasn't expecting anyone. He stood slowly, his mind racing with possibilities. Had Shaw's men found him already? He opened the door cautiously, his breath catching when he saw who was standing there. It was Franklin Shaw. The man who had orchestrated his brother's death stood in the hallway, calm and composed, his hands tucked into the pockets of his expensive coat. His graying hair was slicked back, and his eyes gleamed with cold calculation. "Good evening, Gabriel," Shaw said smoothly, his voice as unshakable as ever. "I thought it was time we had a little chat." Gabriel's heart pounded, but he kept his expression cold. "I have nothing to say to you." Shaw's lips curved into a thin smile. "I think you do. After all, I know you've been digging into things that don't concern you. I wanted to give you one last chance to walk away." Gabriel crossed his arms, blocking the door with his body. "You killed my brother. I'm not walking away from that." Shaw's smile didn't falter. "Your brother dug his own grave. He should have known better than to cross me. And now, you're making the same mistake?" Gabriel's anger surged. "You think you can scare me? I'm not like Edward." Shaw's expression hardened, the pleasantries gone. "You're right. You're not like Edward. You're too ambitious, too proud. Edward was a fool, but he knew when to stop. You, on the other hand, seem intent on pushing this until it gets you killed. Gabriel's jaw tightened. I'm not afraid of you, Shaw. Shaw took a step closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. You should be. Because if you keep going down this path, I won't just bury you. I'll burn everything you've ever loved to the ground. Your business, your reputation, everything your father left you. It'll be ashes by the time I'm done. Gabriel felt a chill run down his spine, but he didn't flinch. You can try, but this time you won't win. Shaw held his gaze for a long moment, then let out a quiet laugh. We'll see about that. Just remember, I gave you a way out. He turned to leave, but paused, glancing back over his shoulder. Oh, and Gabriel? When this is over, you'll wish you'd left Edward buried. Gabriel watched as Shaw disappeared down the hall, the door closing with a heavy finality. The threat hung in the air like a storm cloud, but Gabriel wasn't backing down. He couldn't. Not now. Tomorrow, everything would change. The night of the meeting arrives. Gabriel and Marcus are in position outside the estate, watching the cars roll in one by one. Shaw is inside, along with several of his powerful allies. Gabriel takes a deep breath, knowing that what happens next could either bring justice for Edward or end in his own destruction. The dense trees surrounding the secluded estate cast long shadows under the pale moonlight. Gabriel Morrow crouched low behind the thick undergrowth, his breath coming in shallow bursts as he watched the cars pull up the winding driveway, one after another. The estate loomed ahead, a sprawling mansion lit up like a fortress in the night. Its grand entrance, flanked by private security, looked impenetrable. Beside him, Marcus kept his eyes fixed on the gates, his expression tight with concentration. They had been waiting for this moment, carefully orchestrating every detail, and now, the stakes couldn't be higher. If anything went wrong, they wouldn't just lose the chance to expose Shaw and his network. They would lose everything, possibly even their lives. Gabriel adjusted the earpiece connected to their hired operative, Jackson, a former military man skilled in covert operations. Jackson was their inside man, already positioned somewhere within the estate, ready to guide them once they infiltrated the grounds. Everyone's in position. Jackson's voice came through the earpiece, steady and calm. I've disabled the external cameras. You've got a small window to get past the perimeter security. Gabriel took a deep breath, nodding to Marcus. It was time. They moved quickly through the woods, staying low as they approached the perimeter. The estate's security was tight, with guards patrolling the grounds in regular intervals, but Jackson's intel had given them just enough of an opening. The two men crossed through a gap in the outer fence, slipping into the shadows of the garden. Gabriel's pulse raced as they crept along the side of the mansion, the tension between them thick. Marcus's face was set in grim determination. This was personal for both of them, but Gabriel could feel the weight of Marcus's burden. The years of resentment, the loss of his father, the fight for justice that had consumed him. Gabriel had lost a brother, but Marcus had lost his entire family. Stay sharp, Gabriel whispered as they approached a side door that Jackson had told them would be unlocked. The door creaked slightly as Marcus eased it open, and they slipped inside the mansion, immediately surrounded by the soft glow of dimly lit chandeliers. The interior was as grand and opulent as Gabriel had imagined. Marble floors, towering ceilings, and the unmistakable air of old money. But tonight, the luxury masked something far darker. Tonight, the men inside weren't discussing investments or philanthropy. They were finalizing deals that would protect decades of corruption. As they moved through the hallways, Gabriel's heart pounded louder with each step. Shaw was here, the man who had murdered Edward, the man who had threatened to destroy Gabriel if he didn't back down. But Gabriel wasn't backing down. Jackson's voice crackled in his earpiece. You've got about 10 minutes before the next guard sweep. The meeting's happening in the East Wing, second floor. They climbed a narrow staircase, their footsteps silent against the carpeted steps. At the top, they crouched in the shadows, peering down a long corridor where voices echoed from behind a set of heavy double doors at the far end. This was it. Shaw and his associates were inside, unaware that Gabriel and Marcus were closing in. Gabriel glanced at Marcus, who nodded silently. It was time to get the proof they needed. Marcus had told Gabriel that Shaw's meetings often involved physical contracts, documents signed and sealed during the discussion. If they could get access to those documents, it would be enough to bring Shaw and his allies down. But first, they needed to know what was being discussed. Jackson's voice came through again. There's an alcove to the left of the doors. You'll have a clear line of sight from there. I've got the bugs ready to transmit audio. Gabriel and Marcus slipped into the alcove, their eyes fixed on the double doors. The room beyond was lit brightly, and through the crack in the door, Gabriel could just make out the silhouettes of several men seated around a large conference table. His stomach twisted when he recognized Shaw, seated at the head of the table, his commanding presence filling the room. Gabriel strained to hear the conversation. Finalizing the terms of the new contract, Shaw's voice was crisp, businesslike. With the acquisitions we've secured in South America, we're in the perfect position to control the entire supply chain. We'll be untouchable. There were murmurs of agreement from the other men. Shaw's voice took on a sharper edge. Of course, there are loose ends to tie up. Some distractions we've had to deal with recently. You know how it is. Gabriel's blood ran cold. He knew exactly what distractions Shaw was referring to, him and Marcus. One of the men at the table cleared his throat. You're confident this won't become a problem? Shaw chuckled. I've dealt with problems before. The Morrow family knows better than to cross me. Edward Morrow learned that the hard way. His brother will, too. Gabriel's hands clenched into fists. Hearing Shaw speak so casually about Edward's murder made his blood boil. But he forced himself to remain calm. They needed proof, not revenge. Not yet. Jackson's voice came through the earpiece again, cutting through Gabriel's fury. They're pulling out the contracts now. Get ready to move. Gabriel nodded to Marcus. It was time to act. They waited until the men began signing the contracts, their attention focused on the paperwork in front of them. Then, Gabriel and Marcus moved swiftly, slipping out of the alcove and making their way toward the back entrance of the meeting room, where Jackson had told them a small storage closet was located. From there, they could monitor the rest of the meeting and retrieve the contracts without raising suspicion. Inside the closet, Jackson's voice was in their ears again. You're good to go. The guards are clear for now, but you need to move fast. Marcus was the first to step out, heading toward a small table at the edge of the room where copies of the signed contracts were being stacked. Gabriel followed, his heart racing as he scanned the room for any sign that they had been spotted. But just as they reached the contracts, a voice cut through the air. Going somewhere? Gabriel's blood froze. Shaw was standing at the far end of the room, his eyes locked on Gabriel, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. The room fell silent as the other men turned to look at Gabriel and Marcus, their faces a mix of confusion and recognition. Gabriel Morrow, Shaw said softly, his voice filled with cold amusement. I wondered how long it would take you to show up. Gabriel's mind raced. They had been caught, but they still had a chance. If they could grab the contracts and escape, they could still expose Shaw. Marcus, always quick on his feet, lunged for the stack of papers, but Shaw was faster. He signaled to one of the guards at the door, who pulled out a gun, pointing it directly at Marcus. Don't even think about it, Shaw hissed. Gabriel felt his pulse race, his options narrowing by the second. They couldn't fight their way out. Shaw's men were everywhere, and the guards were already moving to block the exits. Let them go, a voice suddenly cut through the tension. It was Jackson, stepping into the room with his gun drawn, aimed squarely at Shaw. Or I'll make sure you don't leave this room alive. Shaw's eyes flickered with surprise, but he quickly recovered, his smile growing colder. You think you can just walk in here and take what you want? You're outnumbered, Morrow. Gabriel stared Shaw down, the hatred boiling inside him threatening to break free. I don't need to take anything. I already have the proof. Your time is up, Shaw. For the first time, Shaw's confident mask slipped. His eyes darted to the small recording device Gabriel had planted earlier, the one now transmitting every word of their meeting to a remote location. Gabriel could see the realization dawning in Shaw's eyes. You'll never make it out alive, Shaw spat, his voice filled with venom. Gabriel didn't flinch. Maybe not, but your empire is finished. Gabriel and Marcus make a desperate escape as Shaw's men close in, but the recording is already out in the world, threatening to unravel Shaw's entire network. As they flee into the night, Gunfire erupts behind them, and Gabriel realizes that the final battle has just begun, and the real danger is still ahead. The roar of gunfire shattered the silence of the night as Gabriel and Marcus sprinted through the dense forest surrounding the estate. Branches whipped at their faces, and the sharp smell of gunpowder lingered in the cold air. The sound of footsteps and shouts from Shaw's men echoed behind them, growing louder with each second. They were closing in. Gabriel's lungs burned as he pushed himself to run faster, his heart pounding in his chest. The adrenaline coursing through his veins kept him moving, but the weight of what had just happened bore down on him. They had the proof they needed, the recordings that could expose Shaw's entire criminal empire, but getting out alive was the next challenge. "Jackson, where are you?" Marcus hissed into the earpiece as they continued to weave through the thick trees. The moonlight barely pierced the dense canopy, casting eerie shadows all around them. Heading toward the extraction point, Jackson's calm voice came through, a contrast to the chaos unfolding. "You've got maybe 2 minutes before those guys catch up. I'll be there in 1. Stay low." Gabriel gritted his teeth, his mind racing. Shaw's cold, dangerous smile still haunted him, the venom in his words a stark reminder of how ruthless he was. Gabriel had played his hand, revealing that the meeting had been recorded, but now Shaw's men were determined to ensure neither Gabriel nor Marcus made it out alive. "We're almost there," Marcus called out, his eyes scanning the clearing ahead. In the distance, the faint lights of the extraction point flickered through the trees, their only hope of escape. But just as they neared the clearing, a gunshot rang out. Gabriel felt a sharp sting in his leg and stumbled, crashing to the ground. He gasped, pain searing through his thigh. Marcus was at his side in an instant, grabbing him and pulling him behind the cover of a large tree. "You're hit," Marcus muttered, his voice tense as he ripped a strip of cloth from his shirt and tied it around Gabriel's leg, trying to slow the bleeding. Gabriel winced, fighting back the pain. "We have to keep moving. They'll be on us any second." Another round of gunfire erupted, the bullets tearing through the trees around them. Shaw's men were getting closer, their voices growing louder, more confident. Gabriel's mind raced, trying to find a way out. He couldn't let it end like this, not when they were so close. Suddenly, the hum of a helicopter's blades cut through the air, and a spotlight swept over the clearing ahead. Jackson had arrived. "We're here," Marcus shouted into the earpiece. "We need cover." The helicopter's spotlight swiveled, illuminating the woods behind them where Shaw's men were advancing. Jackson fired a warning shot from the helicopter, the bullets tearing into the ground near Shaw's men, forcing them to scatter. "This is your chance." Jackson's voice crackled over the earpiece. "Get to the chopper now." Marcus helped Gabriel to his feet, slinging Gabriel's arm over his shoulder as they limped toward the clearing. The pain in Gabriel's leg was unbearable, but he pushed through, his focus locked on the helicopter's open door, the only thing standing between them and certain death. As they stumbled into the clearing, Jackson's team reached down to pull them aboard. Marcus clambered in first, grabbing Gabriel's arm and hauling him up just as another volley of gunfire erupted from the trees. "Go, go, go," Jackson shouted to the pilot, and the helicopter lifted off just as Shaw's men burst through the tree line, firing after them. The bullets thudded uselessly against the helicopter's metal frame as they soared into the sky, leaving the chaos behind. Gabriel collapsed against the side of the helicopter, gasping for air, his leg throbbing with pain. But despite the physical agony, a strange sense of relief washed over him. They had made it out. They had the proof. And soon, Shaw would fall. Back at Jackson's safe house, Gabriel's leg was treated by a medic from Jackson's team. The bullet had gone clean through, but the wound was deep, and it would take time to heal. As Gabriel sat on the edge of a makeshift bed, watching the blood-stained bandages being wrapped around his leg, his mind raced with everything that had just transpired. Marcus sat across from him, his eyes locked on the small tablet in his hands. The recording from the meeting was playing on a loop, every word Shaw had spoken captured clearly. The deal, the bribes, the threats, everything. "This is it," Marcus said, his voice tight with emotion. "We've got him." Gabriel nodded, the exhaustion weighing heavily on him now. They had the proof, but this wasn't over. They still had to release it, make sure the right people saw it. Shaw's influence was vast, and if they weren't careful, this evidence could disappear before it ever reached the public eye. "We need to move quickly," Gabriel said, leaning forward despite the pain in his leg. "Shaw's already hunting us. Once he realizes we're still alive, he'll pull out every stop to shut us down." Marcus's jaw clenched. "I'll make sure this gets to the press and the authorities. Shaw won't be able to silence it." Gabriel knew Marcus meant well, but they were up against a force far more powerful than either of them could have imagined. Shaw's web of corruption ran deep, deeper than Gabriel had anticipated. It wasn't just about Shaw and the Morrow family. This was about an entire network of powerful men who had built their fortunes on lies and illegal deals. "How far does this go, Marcus?" Gabriel asked, his voice quiet. What else did Edward know? Marcus hesitated, his face clouded with something darker. "There's more, Gabriel. The journal. It's not just about Shaw." Gabriel frowned, leaning in. "What do you mean?" Marcus handed him the journal, flipping to the last few entries. Edward had uncovered something bigger than Shaw's deals. "Your father was part of an international syndicate, money laundering, human trafficking, arms deals. They were using the Morrow Empire as a front. That's why Edward had to go." Gabriel's stomach turned as he read the final pages of the journal. His father, the man he had idolized for so long, hadn't just been a ruthless businessman. He had been involved in the darkest corners of the criminal underworld, and Edward had paid the price for trying to stop him. Gabriel felt sick. The walls of the safe house seemed to close in around him as the weight of the truth settled over him like a heavy fog. "My father," Gabriel whispered, unable to finish the thought. Marcus nodded grimly. "Your father was more dangerous than either of us realized. And Shaw, he's just one piece of the puzzle. If we go after him, we're going up against a global network. They won't stop coming for us." Gabriel closed his eyes, the exhaustion hitting him all at once. He had thought that exposing Shaw would be the end, that he could finally find justice for Edward. But this was just the beginning. The Morrow Empire, everything his father had built, was tainted by a darkness far deeper than he could have ever imagined. "What do we do now?" Gabriel asked, his voice hollow. "We take down Shaw first," Marcus said, his voice filled with determination. "And then we go after the rest of them." Gabriel nodded, his mind swirling with the weight of it all. His father's legacy was built on lies, and now it was up to him to destroy it. Just as Gabriel and Marcus begin planning their next move, the door to the safe house bursts open. Armed men flood in, guns drawn, and before Gabriel can react, he's staring down the barrel of a weapon. Shaw's voice comes from behind them, cold and unforgiving. "I told you, Gabriel. You should have left the past buried." Gabriel's breath caught in his throat as he stared down the barrel of a gun. Shaw's men surrounded the small safe house, weapons raised, their cold eyes locked on him and Marcus. The door had burst open with such force that Gabriel hadn't had time to react. One moment, he was sitting at the table, reeling from the truth about his father, and the next, Shaw's chilling voice echoed through the room, sending a jolt of terror down his spine. "I warned you, Gabriel," Shaw said, stepping into the room with an air of calm authority. His face was unreadable, but his voice carried the weight of someone who had already won. "I told you to leave it alone, but you just couldn't help yourself, could you?" Gabriel's mind raced, but he knew there was no easy way out. Shaw had found them faster than they'd anticipated. The proof they had gathered, the recordings, the journal, it was all within reach, but now it felt like everything was slipping through their fingers. Marcus stood tense beside him, his fists clenched, his eyes darting between the armed men and Shaw. "You can't stop this, Shaw," Marcus spat, his voice defiant. "The evidence is already out there. We recorded everything. It's only a matter of time before it all comes crashing down on you." Shaw's lips curled into a small, cruel smile. "Is that what you think? That your little recording is going to bring me down? You underestimate the power I have, Marcus. The world we live in doesn't care about truth. It cares about power, and I've been at the top of this game far too long to be taken down by a few desperate men." Gabriel swallowed hard, trying to steady his nerves. He could feel the weight of the situation crushing down on him, but he refused to let Shaw see his fear. He had come too far to back down now. "You think you can just kill us and walk away?" Gabriel said, forcing strength into his voice. "The recordings, the journal, they're already in the hands of people who can expose you. You won't get away with this." Shaw's smile faltered for the briefest of moments, his eyes narrowing. "I don't need to kill you, Gabriel. Not yet. But I do need to make sure you understand something. This world, the world your father and I built, is bigger than you. It's bigger than justice. It's bigger than your brother's misguided sense of morality. You've stepped into something you don't fully understand." Gabriel's heart pounded. He felt the truth in Shaw's words, but he wouldn't let him win. Not after everything he had uncovered. Not after Edward. Shaw stepped closer, his presence looming, the scent of cold steel and danger clinging to him. "Do you know what the biggest mistake your father ever made was?" he asked, his voice low. "It wasn't the deals, the corruption, or even his involvement with the syndicate. No, his mistake was thinking that family mattered more than power. Edward proved that when he tried to cross me. And now you're making the same mistake." Gabriel's hands clenched at his sides. He wasn't sure if it was rage or fear that was boiling up inside him, but something snapped. "My father died a coward. He let you corrupt everything we stood for." Shaw's eyes darkened, and in that moment, Gabriel saw the true extent of Shaw's ruthlessness. "Your father wasn't a coward," Shaw replied softly. "He was a man who knew how to survive. A lesson you're about to learn the hard way." Gabriel's mind raced, searching for a way out, but before he could respond, one of Shaw's men moved forward, yanking Marcus from his place beside Gabriel. Marcus struggled, but the man held a gun to his head, silencing any resistance. "You've been a thorn in my side for too long, Marcus," Shaw said, his tone filled with disdain. "You thought you could destroy me, but all you've done is lead me straight to Gabriel. And now, I'm going to make sure you both suffer for your arrogance." Gabriel's heart dropped as Shaw gestured toward his men, who began searching the room, tearing through drawers and cabinets, looking for the journal and the recordings. Gabriel's mind raced. The journal. It was still hidden in the floorboard beneath the table, but how long would it remain safe? "Whatever you're looking for, you won't find it," Gabriel said, his voice steady despite the panic rising in his chest. "The recordings are already gone. It's over, Shaw." Shaw's eyes flickered with doubt, but he didn't waver. "We'll see about that." As Shaw's men continued their search, Gabriel's eyes darted toward Marcus. They had planned for this possibility, but the situation was unraveling faster than they could control. The only chance they had left was to play the one card Shaw didn't know about, the backup copies. Gabriel leaned forward, speaking low enough that only Marcus could hear. "We need to stall him. Jackson has the copies. If we can get him out of here, we still have a chance." Marcus nodded slightly, his eyes narrowing as he met Gabriel's gaze. He understood. "Shaw, you can kill us, but it won't make a difference," Marcus called out, his voice loud and defiant. "We sent everything to multiple sources, journalists, law enforcement. By the time you find us, the world will already know who you really are." Shaw paused, his expression darkening. He stared at Marcus, his eyes burning with cold fury. "You really think I haven't planned for this? I control more than you know. The police, the media, they all answer to me. You're playing a game you've already lost." Gabriel could see the truth in Shaw's eyes. He was afraid. Afraid of the one thing he couldn't control, the truth slipping out beyond his grasp. Gabriel's heart pounded harder, knowing they still had a sliver of hope. Suddenly, one of Shaw's men pulled something from beneath the floorboard, the journal. Gabriel's stomach dropped. Shaw's eyes gleamed with triumph as he snatched it from the man's hands, flipping through the pages. "Well, well," Shaw said softly, running a finger down one of the entries. "Edward's little diary. I imagine this is what you were banking on to bring me down." Gabriel felt a surge of panic. The journal was everything. It was their only concrete proof. But he forced himself to remain calm. "It's too late. The journal's not the only evidence we have." Shaw snapped the journal shut, tucking it into his coat pocket. "You're bluffing, Gabriel, and we both know it." The air grew tense as Shaw turned toward the door, signaling to his men. "Kill them. Both. Quietly. Gabriel's blood ran cold. Time had run out. But just as the nearest gunman raised his weapon, a deafening crash shattered the tension. The windows burst inward, and Jackson's team stormed into the room, guns blazing. Shaw's men scrambled for cover, bullets flying in every direction. Gabriel ducked behind the overturned table as chaos erupted around him. Marcus dove beside him, grabbing a gun from one of the fallen guards. "Jackson's here," Marcus shouted over the gunfire. Gabriel didn't hesitate. This was their moment. As Shaw's men faltered under the sudden attack, Gabriel and Marcus made a break for the door, ducking through the barrage of gunfire. They burst out into the night, running toward the waiting vehicle that Jackson had left idling just beyond the tree line. But before they could reach it, a shot rang out. Gabriel felt the impact before he heard the sound, a sharp, burning pain in his side. He stumbled, collapsing to the ground. "Gabriel," Marcus shouted, dropping to his knees beside him. His face was a mix of panic and determination. "I'm fine," Gabriel gasped, though the pain was excruciating. "Get the recording out. Don't let Shaw win." Marcus looked torn, but he knew what had to be done. He gave Gabriel one last look of understanding before running toward the car, where Jackson was already waiting. Shaw emerged from the house, his face a mask of fury as his men fell around him. He raised his gun, aiming directly at Gabriel. "I warned you," he spat, stepping closer. But before Shaw could pull the trigger, a shot rang out from behind him. Shaw's eyes widened in shock as he staggered forward, blood blooming across his chest. He collapsed to the ground, his hand reaching out futilely toward Gabriel, but it was too late. Jackson stepped out from behind the tree, his smoking gun still raised. He gave Gabriel a nod before running to help Marcus secure the evidence. As Gabriel lay on the cold ground, bleeding and exhausted, he watched as Shaw's empire crumbled before him. The man who had destroyed his family, who had murdered his brother, was finally dead. But the battle wasn't over. As Gabriel is rushed to safety, the news begins to break. Shaw's network is being dismantled piece by piece, but the deeper conspiracy involving Gabriel's father and the international syndicate still looms. Gabriel realizes that Shaw was only the beginning, and the real fight, against those who had controlled his father, is yet to come. The hospital room was eerily quiet, the only sound the steady beep of the heart monitor next to Gabriel's bed. He lay still, staring at the ceiling, his mind buzzing with fragments of the chaos that had led him here. The pain in his side was dulled by medication, but the memories of the gunfight, the blood, and Shaw's cold, lifeless eyes on the ground were still vivid, seared into his mind. Shaw was dead, but the nightmare wasn't over. The door creaked open, and Marcus stepped inside, his face a mix of exhaustion and resolve. He pulled up a chair beside Gabriel's bed, handing him a tablet. "It's happening," Marcus said softly. "The story's out." Gabriel struggled to sit up, wincing as the pain shot through his body. He glanced at the tablet in Marcus's hands, the screen filled with breaking news headlines. "Criminal empire exposed. Shaw's network dismantled," read one. "Morrow family legacy shattered by scandal," read another. Photos of Shaw, documents from Edward's journal, and recordings of the secret meeting were splashed across every major news outlet. It was everywhere. Journalists picked it up within hours, Marcus continued, his voice carrying a weight of relief. "Law enforcement is already moving in. Shaw's men are being arrested, and the deeper network we uncovered is under investigation." Gabriel's eyes scanned the headlines, a strange mixture of satisfaction and sorrow twisting in his chest. He had done it. He had exposed Shaw, brought down the empire that had killed Edward. But the cost, the weight of it all hung heavy on his shoulders. "It's over," Gabriel said quietly, though he didn't fully believe it. Marcus shook his head. "No, Gabriel. Shaw's dead, but the network isn't finished. The people your father worked with, the syndicate, they're still out there. We only cut off one head of the snake." Gabriel nodded, the realization settling in. This was just the beginning of the battle. Shaw was one part of a much larger machine, a machine that had been built on the corruption, greed, and destruction his father had participated in. "I know," Gabriel said, his voice steadier now. "We still have work to do." Over the next few days, as Gabriel recovered, The news spread like wildfire. Every day, new revelations surfaced, deals made in the shadows, bribes paid to politicians and law enforcement, human trafficking operations disguised as legitimate businesses. It was clear now that Shaw's criminal enterprise was just one arm of a sprawling syndicate that reached across the globe. Gabriel watched the fallout from the hospital, unable to shake the feeling that this wasn't just about Shaw. His father's name was beginning to resurface in the investigation, with whispers about his involvement in the darkest corners of the syndicate. But nothing concrete had come out yet. Gabriel knew that once the full extent of his father's crimes came to light, the Morrow family legacy would be destroyed completely. It was a legacy built on lies, and now it was time to tear it down. A week later, Gabriel was finally discharged from the hospital. His wound was healing, but the pain lingered, a constant reminder of how close he had come to losing everything. Marcus picked him up, driving them back to Gabriel's penthouse, though the atmosphere between them was somber. "You know they're going to come after us, right?" Marcus said as they pulled up to the building. "Shaw's dead, but the people he worked for, the syndicate, won't let this go. They've been operating in the shadows for years, and they're not going to let us expose them without a fight." Gabriel nodded, his mind already racing with possibilities. "We need to be ready. We've got the attention of the authorities now, but if we don't act fast, the syndicate will bury everything again." As they entered the penthouse, Gabriel felt a sense of grim determination settle over him. The walls of his home, once a symbol of wealth and power, now felt hollow, tainted by the truth of what his family had done to amass their fortune. He glanced at the portrait of his father hanging on the wall, the same cold, calculating gaze that had once commanded respect. Now, it only filled Gabriel with disgust. "We need to go after the head of the syndicate," Gabriel said firmly, turning to Marcus. "Whoever my father was working for, whoever controls this network, we take them down next." Marcus nodded, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "Are you sure? This goes deeper than Shaw. These people, they have power beyond anything we've faced so far. If we push them, they'll come after us with everything they have." Gabriel clenched his jaw. "Edward gave his life trying to stop them. I won't let his sacrifice be in vain. I won't let them win." Over the next several days, Gabriel and Marcus worked tirelessly, piecing together everything they could from Edward's journal and the information they had uncovered during the takedown of Shaw's network. They traced names, locations, and financial records, slowly unraveling the web of deceit that had been woven by the syndicate. But every time they got close, the trail seemed to disappear. Records wiped, key players vanishing before they could be reached. It was clear that the syndicate was already moving, covering their tracks, preparing for whatever came next. Then, one evening, a breakthrough came. Marcus had been poring over old financial records, trying to find a lead, when he stumbled upon something. A series of offshore accounts connected to a powerful shipping company. The company, one that had once been a partner of the Morrow Empire, had ties to multiple shell corporations, all of which were used to launder money for illegal operations. And at the top of it all was a name Gabriel had never heard before: Victor Lemarchand. "Who is he?" Gabriel asked, staring at the name on the screen. "Lemarchand is one of the most elusive figures in international finance," Marcus explained. "No one knows much about him, but he's been linked to organized crime, money laundering, and arms dealing. If anyone is pulling the strings behind this syndicate, it's him." Gabriel's mind raced. Lemarchand, the man behind everything. The man who had controlled his father and orchestrated the entire operation that had led to Edward's death. "We have to take him down," Gabriel said, his voice filled with a dangerous resolve. Marcus sighed, leaning back in his chair. "It won't be easy. Lemarchand is untouchable. He operates in the shadows, and even if we expose him, he has enough connections to disappear before we get close." "We need to get close enough," Gabriel said, his voice hard. "If we can tie him to the syndicate, to Shaw, to everything, we can take him down." The next day, Gabriel and Marcus prepared for their final move. They had gathered enough evidence to link Lemarchand to the syndicate, but now they needed to draw him out. It was a dangerous gamble, one that could either bring the entire criminal network crashing down or end with Gabriel and Marcus dead. They set up a meeting, using contacts from Gabriel's business empire to make it look like he was willing to negotiate with the syndicate. They offered to sell key financial assets, assets that Lamarchand would want. The bait was set. The meeting was arranged in a private location, a sleek high-rise building with a view of the city below. Gabriel and Marcus waited, tension thick in the air. They were ready. Jackson's team was nearby, prepared to move in if anything went wrong. But Gabriel knew that this time, it had to end, one way or another. Finally, the doors to the conference room opened, and in walked Victor Lamarchand. He was a tall, imposing figure, his presence cold and calculating, much like Shaw had been. But there was something even more sinister about him, something that sent a chill down Gabriel's spine. Lamarchand smiled as he approached. "Gabriel Morrow," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "I've heard much about you." Gabriel didn't flinch. "I'm sure you have." They sat across from each other, the tension palpable. Gabriel could feel Marcus's presence beside him, ready for whatever came next. "You've caused quite a stir," Lamarchand said, leaning back in his chair. "Shaw was a useful pawn, but I'm afraid you've made things difficult for my associates." Gabriel met his gaze, his voice cold. "Shaw's dead, and soon, you will be too." Lamarchand's smile didn't falter. "Is that what you think?" Gabriel leaned forward, his eyes burning with intensity. "We have everything. The recordings, the financials, the names. It's over. The authorities are moving in as we speak. You can't run this time." For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed Lamarchand's face. He glanced at Marcus, then back at Gabriel. "You've made a grave mistake, Morrow." But Gabriel didn't waver. "No, my mistake was letting you get away with this for so long." The sound of sirens filled the air as the authorities swarmed the building. Lamarchand's expression twisted into one of fury, but it was too late. The door burst open, and law enforcement flooded the room, guns drawn, surrounding Lamarchand. As Lamarchand was handcuffed and led away, Gabriel stood, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. It was over. Months later, the trial of Victor Lamarchand and the dismantling of the syndicate had made international headlines. The Morrow name had been dragged through the mud, but Gabriel didn't care. The empire his father had built was gone, but for the first time in his life, Gabriel felt free. Standing at Edward's grave, Gabriel placed the family heirloom ring, the same one Marcus had worn when they first met, on the headstone. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the cemetery. "I did it, Edward," Gabriel whispered, his voice filled with both sorrow and peace. "I brought them down. I wish you were here to see it." Marcus stood beside him, silent but resolute. They had both lost so much, but they had won something more important, justice. As Gabriel walked away from the grave, the weight of his father's sins finally lifted. The Morrow legacy was gone, but he was free to build something new, something better. And for the first time in his life, Gabriel felt ready to live without the shadows of his past.